Every trade deadline, the conversation focuses on the same thing: which contender added the biggest name. But the teams that truly win the deadline usually aren't chasing headlines. The real advantage is quieter. It comes from solving the exact problem a roster has at that moment in its competitive cycle. This year, 5 teams did that particularly well. Detroit entered the deadline in a playoff position, but the roster still had 2 structural gaps: a reliable right-shot defenseman for the second pair and more scoring depth in the top 9. Behind Moritz Seider and Simon Edvinsson, Detroit had been relying on younger or depth options playing slightly above their ideal roles. Justin Falk directly addresses that issue. He can play real top 4 minutes, move the puck well, and still contribute offense from the blue line. His arrival also reshapes the rest of the defense. Other players can now slide into more natural roles. The price, including a first-round pick, reflects the market for a reliable top 4 defenseman at the deadline. Detroit also added veteran winger David Perron, quietly reinforcing the top 9 scoring group that had been inconsistent at 5-on-5. For a team trying to reach the playoffs for the first time in years, stabilizing the roster matters. These moves tighten the structure without forcing major changes elsewhere. Calgary entered the deadline in a very different situation. For years, the Flames had lived in the league's middle tier. Veteran contracts kept them competitive enough to avoid the bottom, but rarely strong enough to truly contend. The deadline finally shifted that balance. Trading Nazem Kadri and Mackenzie Weegar brought back a first-round pick, multiple second-round picks, 2 prospects and 2 players suited to a transitional roster. Olli Määttä, acquired from Utah, provides defensive stability during that transition. Victor Olofsson, arriving from Colorado, adds short-term scoring that can either help the roster now or become another trade asset later. Calgary also quietly added Ryan Strome from Anaheim for a 7th-round pick. It's a low-risk move that gives them a controllable middle 6 center to bridge the next phase. These moves leave Calgary with 14 picks in the first 2 rounds over the next 3 drafts. After this deadline, for the first time in years, the organization's direction is clear. Buffalo's deadline needs were shaped by how their season evolved. Ahead of the deadline, the Sabres went on a massive winning run. They began to look less like a hopeful playoff entrant and more like a team ready to compete. Not a contender yet, but a team capable of handling meaningful games against strong opponents. That shift changes the type of problems a roster must solve. Face-off reliability and defensively responsible forwards become more important once games tighten late in the season. Depth on defense was the obvious need for Sabres. Buffalo's additions targeted exactly those areas. Logan Stanley and Luke Schenn add size and depth to the blue line. They reduce the workload on the top defensive pairings. Sam Carrick adds reliability at center. He wins draws, kills penalties, and handles defensive minutes playoff teams depend on. Tanner Pearson adds an experienced winger who can stabilize the middle of the lineup. These moves make Buffalo harder to play against and more reliable across all 4 lines and 3 defensive pairs. Exactly what this roster needs as it takes the next step in its competitive cycle. The first 3 teams are in transition. Detroit and Buffalo are reinforcing rising cores. Calgary is shifting toward a rebuild. The next 2 teams are in a very different position. They're contenders trying to maximize a championship window right now. Heading into the deadline week, Dallas already looked like one of the most complete teams in the league. But 2 details still stood out. 1, a stable defensive partner for Thomas Harley, and 2, enough forward depth to sustain their scoring structure. The defensive issue was the most visible. Dallas had rotated partners next to Harley for much of the season, something that often becomes exposed in playoff matchups. Tyler Myers addresses that directly. He brings size, experience, and the ability to handle heavy defensive minutes. With Vancouver retaining salary, Dallas acquired Myers for a 2027 second-round pick and a distant 4th. That's a modest price for a defender capable of playing 20 minutes a night. Up front, Michael Bunting, acquired from Nashville, helps replace some of the secondary scoring lost when Tyler Seguin went out for the season. He's the type of winger who produces without needing top-line minutes. Dallas reinforced the depth that already makes them difficult to match up against. For a contender, moves like that can matter as much as blockbuster trades. Which brings us to the team that may have helped itself the most. Colorado's deadline wasn't about fixing a weakness, it was about removing uncertainty. Down the middle, the Avalanche were already in good shape. Brock Nelson had settled in as the second-line center and was having a strong season. Jack Drury had been quietly overperforming in his role. But Colorado pushed the position even further. The return of Nazem Kadri immediately changes the balance of the lineup. Even at 35, he remains a creative offensive driver. He transports the puck and generates chances across the top 9. Kadri already knows Bednar's system from the 2022 Cup run. That means almost no adjustment period. Colorado layered that move on top of an earlier addition, Nick Roy. Roy is a defensively reliable center who can handle tough minutes, defensive zone starts, and puck retrieval work. These two moves cost significant capital. Colorado paid 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, Victor Olofsson, and additional assets. For most teams, that price would feel heavy. But Colorado isn't operating cautiously. When a roster built around McKinnon and Makar has a real cup window, certainty at key positions matters more than future assets. That's exactly what this deadline delivered. If you see it differently or think another team belongs on this list, let me know in the comments. I'm curious which deadline moves you thought mattered most. If this made sense to you, you're in the right place. This is iSense.